It was a regular Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. I had just finished a long day at the firm, feeling the usual mix of fatigue and relief as I settled into my home office. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow through the windows, and the faint aroma of Amanda's cooking wafted from the kitchen. I looked forward to the usual routine: dinner together, catching up on our days, and perhaps watching a show before bed. But fate had other plans. As I sorted through the clutter on my desk, I noticed Amanda's phone lying face up. It was an odd thing for her to leave unattended, but I shrugged it off. I was just about to return to my papers when I caught a glimpse of a message notification. Curiosity gnawed at me, and against my better judgment, I picked up the phone. I shouldn't have done it, but I couldn't resist. My heart sank as I unlocked the screen. There it was, an exchange between Amanda and none other than Ben Williams, my colleague and friend. At first, it was just small talk, some jokes about a case we had recently discussed at work. But as I scrolled through their messages, the casual banter morphed into something more intimate. Words like, "miss you," and "can't wait to see you again," jumped off the screen, each one like a dagger plunging deeper into my heart. I felt my pulse quicken, and my hands shook slightly as I continued to read. Amanda had shared personal thoughts, things that should have been reserved for me, her husband. "You understand me like no one else," she wrote, followed by an emoji that twisted the knife even further. My stomach churned as I realized the implications of their exchanges. They were not just friends, they were crossing a line that I never imagined could be crossed. I was flooded with a whirlwind of emotions: disbelief, anger, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. How long had this been going on? Was it just a fling, or something deeper? I thought of the nights we spent together, the laughter, the shared dreams, and I felt the weight of it all collapsing around me. I had trusted Amanda implicitly, never questioning her loyalty. Yet here I was, staring at the damning evidence that shattered everything I believed. A part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to throw her phone across the room and demand answers. But something held me back. I realized that a rash reaction would only make matters worse. I needed to think this through. What was the point of screaming accusations? I had to be smart about this. I put down the phone, my mind racing. This was more than just a betrayal. It was a challenge. I could either let this consume me or turn it into something I could control. At that moment, a cold determination began to take shape within me. I would not be the victim in this scenario. Instead, I would devise a plan, a way to make them both pay for their deception. As the evening unfolded, I tried to act normal. I joined Amanda in the kitchen, helping her set the table as we prepared to have dinner. She chatted about her day, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I nodded along, forcing a smile, but my mind was elsewhere, calculating every possible move I could make. The thought of Ben, my colleague, my friend, sharing my wife, made my blood boil. I could feel the cracks in our marriage widening as I forced down the food. Every bite felt like chewing on betrayal. How could I have been so blind? I vowed to uncover the truth, to find out how deep this went. But more importantly, I would make sure that both Amanda and Ben faced the consequences of their actions. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I replayed the messages in my mind, each word a reminder of the deception that had infiltrated my life. I felt a strange calmness settle over me as I realized that this was just the beginning. I would take my time and plan my next moves carefully. This wasn't just about infidelity, this was about revenge. In the days that followed my discovery, I felt like I was living in a fog. Every morning, I would wake up to the sound of Amanda moving about the house. Her cheerful demeanor a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside me. I had gone from a man in love to a man betrayed, and it was unsettling. The feelings of anger and sorrow mixed, swirling like a storm in my chest. But instead of allowing those emotions to consume me, I chose a different path, a path of calculated revenge. The first few nights were sleepless. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, contemplating my options. I could confront Amanda, yell at her, and demand answers. But where would that lead me? It would only bring chaos, leaving me with more questions and no real resolution. I realized that I had to think strategically. I wanted to make sure my actions were effective, striking a blow that would not only hit Amanda and Ben but would also leave a lasting impact. I began to form a plan, envisioning each step like a chess game. I needed to gather information first, intelligence that would help me devise the perfect strategy. Ben was a well-respected attorney in our firm, known for his sharp mind and impeccable reputation. However, I knew that behind the polished exterior, there were vulnerabilities, just like in anyone else. I decided to start with surveillance. I told myself I was simply being diligent, but deep down, I felt a thrill at the thought of playing detective. Over the next week, I paid close attention to Ben's movements, casually observing him during work hours. I watched as he chatted with colleagues and interacted with clients, always maintaining that charming smile. But I knew there was more beneath the surface. I devised excuses to meet with mutual friends, engaging them in conversation about Ben. I wanted to gather as much information as possible: who he was associating with outside of work, what kinds of cases he was involved in, and whether there were any cracks in his seemingly flawless reputation. The more I learned, the clearer my strategy became. As I gathered intel, I also began to form a mental list of Ben's weaknesses. There had to be something I could exploit, an error, a misstep that would throw him into disarray. The financial aspect of his work stood out to me. Lawyers deal with large sums of money, and any suspicion of wrongdoing could lead to devastating consequences. I remembered the recent case he had been working on, involving high-profile clients and significant financial stakes. It was the perfect angle for my plan. But it wasn't just about Ben. I needed to ensure Amanda felt the full weight of her betrayal as well. She had chosen to stand by him, defending him against the very accusations that would eventually come. I decided that her involvement would be the catalyst for her downfall. I could make it so that she, too, was implicated in the fallout from Ben's financial misdeeds. With my plan slowly taking shape, I felt a sense of empowerment I hadn't experienced in days. I no longer felt like a victim. I felt like a man who was taking control of his life. Each step I envisioned filled me with a sense of purpose. I would not be the one left in the dust. Instead, I would watch as the consequences of their actions unfolded. As the weeks passed, I became more and more consumed by my scheme. I meticulously planned every detail, ensuring that I had a solid foundation before executing my moves. I felt a sense of thrill in my heart. This was not just revenge, it was justice, my justice. I spent evenings researching financial crimes, how investigations unfolded, and the kinds of evidence that could implicate someone in wrongdoing. I knew that I had to be discreet and clever. Timing would be crucial. I imagined the look on Amanda's face when she discovered the truth about Ben. How her world would crumble beneath her. And Ben, his career hanging by a thread as he faced accusations that would shake the very foundation of his life. I relished the thought of their panic, their confusion, and their helplessness. Every night, I sat at my desk, poring over notes, crafting my strategy, and envisioning the perfect scenario. It was no longer just about hurt feelings, it was about dismantling the life they had built together, the life they had stolen from me. I would ensure that they would have no choice but to confront the consequences of their actions. As I moved forward with my plan, I felt a sense of clarity. I was no longer a passive participant in my own life, but an architect of my revenge. I would bring their world crashing down, one piece at a time. With each step, I felt stronger, more resolute, and utterly determined. It was time to set my plan into motion. With each passing day, I found myself growing more confident in my plan. The details were coming together, and I was inching closer to the moment when I would unleash my revenge on Amanda and Ben. My days were filled with meticulous observation, and I was starting to uncover the cracks in Ben's seemingly flawless facade. I spent hours at the firm, feigning normalcy while I discreetly gathered intelligence. I overheard conversations in the break room and eavesdropped on casual meetings. It was during one of these sessions that I learned about a high-stakes financial case Ben was handling. The firm had taken on a wealthy client involved in a complex series of transactions, and I sensed that this was the key to my plan. As I listened to the details of the case, I realized that it involved substantial sums of money, millions. The more I dug into it, the clearer it became that there were potential vulnerabilities within the financial dealings that could be exploited. If I could create a situation that cast doubt on Ben's integrity, he would be at the mercy of an investigation, and that would bring everything crashing down around him. I began to outline my strategy. The first step was to familiarize myself with the specifics of the case. I knew that if I was going to frame Ben for financial misconduct, I had to understand the intricacies of his work. So, I began researching financial laws and regulations, especially those related to fraud and embezzlement. I needed to be well versed in what constituted a violation, which would allow me to plant the right evidence. I reached out to a few trusted colleagues, engaging them in casual conversations about Ben and the case he was managing. I asked leading questions about the firm's operations and any potential risks associated with the transactions. Each time I did this, I took meticulous notes, collecting information that could serve as a foundation for my scheme. As I gathered details, I became particularly interested in the firm's internal accounting practices. I learned that there were certain checks and balances in place, but also that they could be manipulated if someone was clever enough. I needed to find a way to make it look like Ben was cooking the books, and the perfect opportunity presented itself. I discovered that there were reports generated regularly, documenting financial activity and discrepancies. If I could somehow tamper with those reports, it could lead to serious questions about Ben's conduct. I envisioned a scenario where I could plant falsified documents, information that would implicate him in fraudulent activity. My mind raced with possibilities. What if I created fake financial statements showing inflated figures or missing funds? I could engineer a situation where it appeared that Ben had been skimming money off the top, diverting funds into accounts he controlled. But I also needed to be cautious. I didn't want to raise any suspicions before I was ready to strike. So, I began laying the groundwork for my deception. I started to gain access to sensitive information by volunteering to help with routine audits, a perfect cover for getting closer to the financial records I needed to manipulate. I used my charm to win over colleagues who had access to the documents, positioning myself as a helpful team player while secretly plotting their downfall. As I engaged in these activities, I also made sure to monitor Ben closely. I wanted to understand his schedule and any potential vulnerabilities. I discovered that he often stayed late at the office, engrossed in his work, and that made it easier for me to operate under the radar. I began to plan for the day when I would set my trap. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I learned about an upcoming financial review meeting with the firm's partners. This would be the perfect opportunity to set my plan into motion. I could create a situation that would ensure all eyes were on Ben just as the investigation into the financial discrepancies began. The timing had to be perfect. I could almost see the scenario playing out in my mind. I felt a rush of adrenaline as I visualized the moment when everything would unfold. Ben would walk into that meeting, confident and unsuspecting, only to have the floor pulled out from under him as the evidence I had planted was brought to light. I imagined Amanda, watching in horror as her world fell apart alongside his. With each detail I meticulously planned, I felt a growing sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just a simple act of revenge, it was a carefully orchestrated performance, and I was the conductor of this symphony of destruction. I would ensure that not only would Ben face the consequences of his actions, but Amanda would be left reeling from the fallout of her choices. The pieces were finally coming together. I was no longer just a man seeking revenge. I was a master strategist, poised to execute a plan that would change everything. The stage was set, and all that was left to do was wait for the perfect moment to strike. The day of reckoning had finally arrived. I had spent weeks meticulously planning every detail, and now it was time to execute my scheme. As I prepared to plant the fabricated evidence in Ben's office, I felt a mix of excitement and adrenaline coursing through me. This was the moment when my revenge would come to fruition, and I was ready to take the plunge. My first task was to create the falsified documents that would serve as the crux of my plan. I had spent countless hours researching how financial documents were structured and what kind of details auditors typically scrutinized. I understood that for my deception to work, the documents had to be plausible. They needed to look authentic enough to pass the scrutiny of any investigation. Using my computer late at night, I crafted financial statements that showed irregularities, missing funds, inflated income reports, and questionable transfers. I made sure to use the same fonts, formats, and terminology that Ben would use in his legitimate documents. To give them an extra layer of authenticity, I included the firm's letterhead and signatures of people who would appear credible. I even went as far as to create fake email chains between Ben and other colleagues discussing the discrepancies in hushed tones, as if they were in on the scheme. Once I was satisfied with the documents, I printed them out on high-quality paper to make them appear as official as possible. Each page looked convincing enough to make any investigator raise an eyebrow. I felt a surge of triumph as I held the final product in my hands. This was the weapon I would use to bring Ben to his knees. The next step was to execute the plan without raising suspicion. I decided to use my upcoming audit volunteering as a perfect cover. I had positioned myself as a helpful colleague, which would allow me access to the office supplies and documents I needed to execute my plan. That day, I made sure to wear a casual but professional outfit, something that would help me blend in seamlessly with the office environment. As I arrived at the firm, I was hyper-aware of my surroundings. I greeted my coworkers casually, engaging in small talk to keep up appearances. All the while, my heart raced with the anticipation of what was to come. I made my way to Ben's office, which was located in a quieter corner of the floor. When I reached his office, I paused to listen for any sounds inside. The coast was clear. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. I slipped inside and quickly scanned the room. Everything was as I remembered it: the sleek desk, the framed diplomas on the wall, and the organized chaos of legal documents piled high. I knew I had limited time before someone could walk in, so I moved swiftly. I pulled out the folder containing the falsified documents and found a strategic spot in his desk drawer, carefully placing them beneath a stack of papers that looked important but unremarkable. I made sure to create a natural-looking arrangement as if the documents had always been there. Before leaving, I glanced around one last time, ensuring I hadn't left any evidence of my intrusion. I could already envision the fallout from my actions. I could picture Ben opening that drawer, his face turning pale as he realized what he was looking at. The thought sent shivers down my spine, and I relished the impending chaos. With my heart racing, I exited his office and made my way back to my desk, trying to maintain my composure. I could hardly contain my excitement as I returned to my routine tasks. I spent the rest of the day acting completely normal, all while waiting for the right moment to set my trap in motion. Over the next few days, I watched Ben closely, eager to see how he would react to the documents I had planted. I made sure to engage in casual conversations with our coworkers, steering discussions toward Ben's workload and the upcoming financial review meeting. I noticed him growing increasingly distracted, often lost in thought, which only fueled my anticipation. Then, the moment I had been waiting for arrived. I learned that the financial review meeting was scheduled for the following week, and Ben would be presenting his findings on the very case that I had targeted. It was the perfect time for my fabricated evidence to come to light. I knew that the pressure would be immense, and the partners would be closely scrutinizing his every word. As the days passed, I felt a sense of satisfaction wash over me. I had successfully created a situation that would bring Ben's world crashing down. And it was all unfolding exactly as I had planned. I was no longer just a victim. I had become the architect of my revenge, crafting a narrative that would ultimately lead to their ruin. As I prepared for the upcoming meeting, I couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration. The stage was set, the players were in position, and soon enough, the curtain would rise on the chaos I had orchestrated. All that was left to do was wait for the moment when my carefully laid plans would finally come to fruition. The thrill of impending justice was intoxicating, and I was ready to watch it all unfold. The atmosphere in the office shifted dramatically in the days following the planting of the documents. What had once been a routine work environment was now thick with tension and uncertainty. Whispers filled the hallways, and colleagues exchanged furtive glances as they speculated about what was happening. It was only a matter of time before the storm I had orchestrated would break, and I was filled with a sense of exhilaration at the unfolding drama. The day of the financial review meeting arrived, and I could hardly contain my excitement. I made sure to appear nonchalant as I passed Ben in the hallway. He looked tense, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a furrowed brow. I pretended to be absorbed in my work, offering him a casual nod as we crossed paths. But inside, I was reveling in the anticipation of what was to come. The meeting was scheduled for the late afternoon, and as the hours dragged on, I could see the pressure mounting. Ben was preparing to present his findings, and I knew he had no idea what awaited him. When the time finally came, I slipped into the conference room with the other partners, feigning ignorance while secretly monitoring the proceedings. Ben stood at the front of the room, a presentation loaded onto the screen behind him. As he began to speak, I watched closely, studying his body language. He was articulate as he outlined the details of the financial case, but I could see the subtle signs of stress creeping in. His hands trembled slightly, and his voice wavered just a fraction when he mentioned the figures I had manipulated. I was filled with a thrill. He had no idea the trap was already set. As the meeting progressed, the partners began to ask questions, probing deeper into the financial specifics. I could see Ben growing increasingly uncomfortable as they directed their inquiries toward the very issues I had engineered. It was only a matter of time before someone stumbled upon the evidence I had placed in his office. And then, just as I had anticipated, it happened. One of the senior partners, an astute and detail-oriented man named Richard, asked about discrepancies in the financial reports. "Ben," he began, his voice steady but commanding, "can you explain why these figures appear inflated in the last quarter? It doesn't seem to align with the previous reports." A palpable silence enveloped the room. All eyes were on Ben as he stammered out a response, desperately trying to justify the discrepancies without revealing the reality of the situation. But the more he spoke, the more evident it became that he was struggling to maintain his composure. I could see the panic rising within him, and it filled me with a sense of satisfaction. "Let's take a closer look at the documentation," Richard insisted, his tone unyielding. He gestured for Ben to provide the financial statements he had been referencing. It was then that I felt a rush of adrenaline. This was the moment when everything would begin to unravel. Ben's face turned pale as he realized he would have to face the documents I had planted. I could see him grappling with the implications, trying to think of a way to explain away the evidence without incriminating himself further. I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself a small, satisfied smile. After a few agonizing moments, Ben finally nodded, the weight of the room pressing down on him. He pulled out his laptop and attempted to pull up the necessary documents, but his hands shook as he navigated the screens. The partners exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of concern and skepticism. It was clear that their suspicions were growing. As the meeting continued, I watched with rapt attention as Richard and the other partners began to probe deeper into Ben's finances. They asked about his interactions with certain clients and the transactions tied to the case I had targeted. I could feel the tension rising in the room as Ben struggled to provide satisfactory answers. He was clearly on the defensive, and I savored every moment of his discomfort. The final nail in the coffin came when one of the partners mentioned the missing documents. "Ben, it seems we haven't received the reports for the last 3 months. Can you explain why that is?" Richard's voice cut through the air like a knife. I could see Ben's mind racing as he tried to form a coherent response, but the panic was setting in. It wasn't long before whispers of an official investigation began to circulate. I knew that the firm would have no choice but to take the matter seriously, especially with the implications of financial misconduct looming over Ben. The partners decided to escalate the situation, initiating a formal inquiry into the discrepancies. I watched as Ben was called into a private meeting with the partners, a meeting that would undoubtedly change the course of his career. As he walked into the room, shoulders slumped and eyes downcast, I felt a surge of triumph. This was the culmination of my efforts, a meticulously orchestrated plan that was beginning to pay off. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the office became increasingly charged with tension. News of the investigation spread like wildfire, and employees speculated about the fallout. I made sure to play the part of the supportive colleague, offering sympathetic glances to Ben as he navigated the storm brewing around him. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction watching him squirm, knowing I was the puppet master behind his downfall. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Ben was under intense scrutiny. The firm brought in external auditors to review the financial records, and I could only imagine the fear that gripped him as he faced the inevitable consequences of my actions. My heart raced with anticipation. The drama I had set in motion was finally coming to fruition. I had turned the tables on them both, and now it was only a matter of time before they would have to confront the full extent of their betrayal. I was ready to watch as their worlds unraveled, knowing that I had orchestrated this chaos with precision. The thrill of revenge was intoxicating, and I relished every moment of it. The moment Amanda learned about the investigation into Ben, her protective instincts kicked in. I had never seen her so driven, so focused on defending someone else, and it stirred a whirlwind of emotions within me. She had spent the past few months sneaking around with him behind my back, and now, suddenly, she was all about loyalty and justice for him. The irony was almost laughable. As the investigation heated up, Amanda began to immerse herself in Ben's legal issues, spending late nights at his apartment poring over documents and strategizing on how to present his defense. I watched from a distance. My heart twisted with a mix of rage and anticipation. While I relished the unfolding chaos, Amanda's involvement presented an unexpected complication. I knew that if she was too invested in Ben's case, it could lead her to inadvertently reveal herself as a potential accomplice. It was only a matter of time before she would be pulled into the whirlwind of this mess. Every time I saw her leave the house, I felt a pang of satisfaction knowing she was stepping into a trap of my design. I could only imagine the conversations they were having. The late-night brainstorming sessions filled with passionate exchanges about his innocence. It fueled my desire to watch everything crumble around them. One evening, I overheard Amanda talking on the phone while I pretended to be engrossed in a book. She was discussing potential witnesses and strategies, her voice low but laced with urgency. "We have to find someone who can vouch for Ben's integrity," she said. "If we can prove that he had no motive for any of this, it could make a huge difference." The resolve in her tone was both frustrating and impressive. She was determined to clear Ben's name, unaware of the web she was weaving around herself. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation dragged on. Amanda's involvement deepened as she started organizing evidence that she believed would help exonerate Ben. She contacted former colleagues and gathered documents, all while staying completely oblivious to the repercussions her actions could have on her own life. I realized I had to capitalize on this opportunity, to intertwine her fate with Ben's in a way that would further entrap her in my plan. As Amanda delved deeper into the legal labyrinth she had willingly entered, she began to make critical mistakes. Mistakes that I was more than ready to exploit. I observed as she compiled files that could easily be misconstrued, inadvertently including documents related to the case I had engineered against Ben. She thought she was building a strong defense, but in reality, she was laying the groundwork for her downfall. One afternoon, I decided to pay a visit to Ben's office under the pretense of discussing work. As I entered, I noticed Amanda there as well, rifling through files. My heart raced with anticipation. This was the perfect opportunity to strike. I casually engaged them in conversation, feigning concern for Ben's predicament, while secretly nudging Amanda toward a conversation about the evidence she was collecting. "Have you thought about what could happen if the investigation uncovers anything linking you two?" I asked, a hint of mock concern in my voice. "I mean, it's pretty serious stuff, and the firm won't take it lightly." Both Ben and Amanda exchanged a worried glance, and I could see the gears turning in their minds. Amanda was starting to realize that her involvement in Ben's defense could backfire. But rather than retreating, she doubled down. "I'm just trying to help him, Jackson," she replied, her voice defensively firm. "We can't let them take him down for something he didn't do." This was the turning point. I knew Amanda's determination would push her further into a corner. So I decided to use my knowledge of her research against her. I casually mentioned how easy it would be for investigators to misinterpret the files she had collected, especially if they didn't realize she was merely trying to help Ben. "You never know what might look suspicious, especially if they find those documents you put together. It could be seen as you trying to cover for him," I added, letting the insinuation hang in the air. Her expression shifted from determination to concern. I could see the realization dawning on her. She was playing a dangerous game, one where she could easily become collateral damage. The irony of it all didn't escape me. As she fought to protect Ben, she was inadvertently digging her own grave. The next few days were tense. Amanda began to withdraw, her earlier confidence replaced by a growing anxiety. She became meticulous about her work, double-checking everything she sent to Ben and trying to distance herself from any documents that could be perceived as incriminating. But I was ready to pounce. I started subtly planting ideas in her head about how to present the evidence, all while ensuring that she remained blind to the potential pitfalls. One evening, I set the stage for the ultimate trap. I sent an anonymous tip to the firm's compliance officer, detailing Amanda's involvement in gathering evidence for Ben. I made sure to include references to specific documents and discussions that could easily be interpreted as collusion. The moment I hit send, I felt a surge of satisfaction. The dominoes were finally in place, and all I had to do was sit back and watch as the fallout unfolded. When the investigators began to look into Amanda's activities, I could hardly contain my excitement. The news broke quickly. She was called in for questioning. I had arranged for the situation to appear as if she was not only helping Ben but also potentially implicated in the very crimes he was accused of. Watching her face as she sat in that conference room, blindsided by the realization that she was now part of the investigation, filled me with a twisted sense of triumph. She had become a key player in the drama, and now she had to face the consequences of her choices that had unwittingly intertwined her fate with Ben's. I knew that the walls were closing in on them both. As Amanda fought to defend herself, I reveled in the knowledge that my plan had succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. Their lives were spiraling out of control, and I was the architect of their demise, quietly savoring the chaos I had orchestrated. The day Ben was officially fired from the firm felt surreal. I had watched him climb the ranks, his charisma and intelligence earning him the respect of colleagues and clients alike. Yet here he was, stripped of everything he had worked for, the weight of the accusations hanging over him like a dark cloud. I stood at a distance, feigning concern, but inside, I was relishing every moment of his downfall. The firm had convened an emergency meeting to address the allegations of financial misconduct that had been leveled against Ben. As I sat in the audience, I could feel the tension in the air. Partners exchanged glances, and the murmur of concerned whispers filled the room. Ben's face, once confident and assured, was now etched with despair as he faced the panel of his superiors, each of them more stoic than the last. Ben, given the seriousness of these allegations, we have no choice but to terminate your employment effective immediately. Richard announced, his tone devoid of empathy. The words felt like a dagger, piercing through the silence in the room. Ben's face fell, and I could see the disbelief washing over him, mingled with anger and humiliation. I didn't do anything wrong. You have to believe me. Ben's voice cracked, desperation seeping through his carefully composed facade. But the partners were resolute, their minds made up long before the meeting had even begun. They had already lost trust in him, and the evidence I had orchestrated, was all they needed to justify their decision. As the meeting concluded and Ben was escorted out, I felt a rush of exhilaration. He was no longer the formidable lawyer he had been just weeks prior. He was a man defeated, his professional life in shambles, and I was the architect of this catastrophe. But the fallout didn't stop with Ben. Amanda, caught in the crossfire, faced her reckoning. The moment the news broke about Ben's termination and the surrounding allegations, the whispers of scandal began to circulate like wildfire. People were quick to judge. And Amanda's involvement became the talk of the office and beyond. Social media is lit up with speculation and rumors. Friends and acquaintances who had once held Amanda in high regard began to distance themselves. I watched as she received messages filled with disappointment and scorn, her phone buzzing incessantly with notifications that she dared not open. Each ding was a reminder of her falling reputation, a testament to the damage that had been done. At first, Amanda tried to brush it off. People love a good scandal, she would say, attempting to maintain her composure. But deep down, I knew the truth was beginning to sink in. Her reputation as a dedicated professional, built over years of hard work and determination, was rapidly unraveling. She had thrown herself into defending Ben, only to find herself entangled in the very mess she had sought to fix. As the days passed, Amanda's demeanor changed. The confident woman I had once known had faded into someone more uncertain. Her self-assuredness replaced by anxiety. She began to avoid social gatherings, skipping out on work events that would have once been a source of pride for her. Instead, she cloistered herself at home, engulfed in despair as the public scrutiny mounted. The final blow came when Amanda received an official notification from her firm. Due to her involvement in the investigation, she was placed on indefinite leave pending further review. Her colleagues, once supportive and encouraging, now looked at her with skepticism. Their respect eroded by the scandal. Amanda had become the poster child for betrayal, a woman caught in a web of lies and deceit. I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph as I watched her unravel. Every day, I'd check social media to see the latest posts, the memes that painted her as the villain in this story. Friends who had once rallied around her were now sharing articles discussing her role in the investigation, and the backlash she faced was intense. She was losing everything she had worked for. And I was the one pulling the strings. Eventually, Amanda decided to make a public statement, hoping to quell the rumors and reclaim her reputation. She gathered her courage and posted a heartfelt message on her social media accounts, expressing her disbelief over the situation and her commitment to standing by Ben, despite the fallout. But her words fell flat. Instead of garnering sympathy, they were met with backlash, as people questioned her judgment and integrity. Who would support a man accused of such serious crimes? One commenter wrote, "She must be hiding something too." The comments flooded in, and with each notification, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. She was spiraling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. As the weeks turned into months, the consequences of my carefully laid plans began to manifest in full. Ben found himself on the outskirts of the legal community, struggling to find new work as the whispers of his alleged misconduct haunted him. Amanda faced an uphill battle to regain her standing in a society that now viewed her with suspicion. I could see the toll it was taking on her. Her vibrant spirit was being replaced by a shell of the person she used to be. They were both losing everything: their careers, their respect, their sense of self. And I was left standing on the sidelines, watching the consequences of my actions unfold like a carefully scripted drama. In the end, I had succeeded in dismantling their lives, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had merely scratched the surface of their suffering. As their worlds collapsed, I was reminded that revenge, while sweet, often leaves a bitter aftertaste. As the dust began to settle on the chaos I had unleashed, I found myself standing at a crossroads. The thrill of revenge had initially been intoxicating, but now it felt like an empty victory. Watching Ben and Amanda grapple with the consequences of my carefully orchestrated plan was both satisfying and strangely disheartening. I knew it was time for me to step away from the wreckage I had created. One crisp autumn morning, I decided it was time to leave the city behind. I packed my bags, carefully selected the few possessions that mattered most, and took one last look at the life I had built here. The memories flooded in, some good, some bad, but they all felt distant now, overshadowed by the recent events. I had orchestrated a masterclass in revenge, and now it was time to exit the stage. As I drove away from the city, I felt a sense of freedom wash over me. The open road ahead was inviting, filled with possibilities. I could almost hear the echoes of their struggles fading in the rearview mirror. I imagined Ben searching for new job opportunities, desperately trying to salvage his reputation. I pictured Amanda attending awkward social events, facing judgment from former friends, her every move scrutinized. They were left to pick up the pieces, and I was relieved to be free of their turmoil. Over the next few weeks, I received updates from friends and colleagues who remained in touch with the world I had left behind. The news wasn't good for either of them. Ben's attempts to rebuild his career were met with skepticism, and he struggled to find legal work that would accept him after the allegations. Amanda, too, found herself isolated, her efforts to reclaim her professional standing thwarted at every turn. The public had turned on her, and it was clear that the damage was irreparable. I couldn't help but feel a twisted satisfaction as I heard snippets of their struggles. My plan had succeeded beyond my expectations. They were both paying the price for their betrayal, and I had successfully removed myself from the mess. The freedom of being unencumbered by their problems was liberating, yet a part of me still felt hollow. I had exacted my revenge, but at what cost? Weeks turned into months, and while I settled into my new life, the shadows of my past began to haunt me. I was haunted by memories of Amanda, her laughter, and the moments we had shared. I couldn't deny that there had been a time when I had loved her. But the betrayal had overshadowed everything. It felt like a lifetime ago, and yet it lingered in the corners of my mind, reminding me of the choices I had made. Eventually, I reached a point where I could reflect on what had happened without the sharp pangs of anger. I had gotten my revenge, but I had also lost something essential in the process: my sense of self. The man who had meticulously plotted their downfall was now just a shadow of himself, wandering through life without purpose. But I knew I could never go back. The damage had been done, and the ghosts of my past were better left behind. As I embraced my new life, I found solace in the knowledge that I had achieved what I set out to do. I had dismantled their lives and left them to confront the consequences of their actions. And so, I continued down the road, leaving behind the memories of Ben and Amanda, their struggles slowly fading into the distance. My vengeance had been completed, and it was time for me to carve out a new path, one that was solely mine, free from the chains of the past. As the landscape changed outside my window, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. The chapter had come to an end, and it was time to begin anew.